Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and recently, maybe about 2-3 weeks ago, Blizzard decided to buff some of the worst specs that I would say were underperforming within the raiding content of patch 8.3. You know, every single raid, every single patch, the fights determine which specs are going to be the best. Certain fights maybe are cleave based, so any class that's good at 2-target, 3-target cleave is going to shine. Maybe a fight is jam-packed with adds, so anything with massive AoE is going to be important. Some fights might even be pure single target. Not every spec is made the same, and as balancing tuning goes throughout the game as gear progresses, certain specs rise to the top and others fall bottom. And Blizzard decided to buff 5 specs that were in particular underperforming within patch 8.3. So in this video, I decided to play all these specs and give you guys my opinion on how all those specs feel after all these changes and after playing them and testing them thoroughly. You might be interested at the results if you are a Marksmanship Hunter main, Windwalker, Frost Mage, Enhancement Shaman, or a Demonology Warlock, as all these classes gotta change up within the PvE content. I want to give you guys a bit of insight. What is the representation looking like for all these specs? Did any of them become popular for any fights or any parts of the game like dungeons, raiding, or PvP? And also give you a bit of a glimpse of my personal experience with these specs. So hopefully guys, it helps you answer the question if any of these specs are worth investing time into, or maybe these are your main specs and you're just wondering how they're doing within PvP or PvE content. Do any of these buffs affect them in any ways, and is there a new trend that people are following that has to do with these specs right now? The first spec we'll start this list video with is Windwalker. Windwalker's got a 5% buff along with other classes. And Windwalker's, I would say, is one of those classes that I decided to discover once patch 8.3 dropped. First of all, let's just get this straight. Windwalker has probably one of the best playstyles in the game. The rotation, the mastery where you can't repeat your abilities, is definitely something unique. It definitely gives you a different playstyle and a very good one. It feels great to play the spec, but of course the question is going to be, is this spec going to be good like a rogue or a demon hunter? Is it going to overtake any of those powerful specs, or how does the damage feel overall? Well, first of all, you're definitely not going to replace demon hunters or rogues. All those classes have one thing you don't, which is an invulnerability. Karma is good, and diffuse magic can be great, but you do not have one big button that gets you out of a bad situation. However, the damage from Windwalkers with a 5% buff really does feel great. The Fists of Furies are good, as they always have been, but now they have a bit more of a punch, pun intended. I found myself doing a lot more damage than I expected on my Windwalker, and this is not a spec I'm investing a crazy amount of time into. For the most part, I don't want to really get the best in slot essences. I mean, I feel like I've done it with so many characters, I'm kind of just over it. I'm just running with something like Reaping Flames for everything, PvE or PvP. It could be because that I've gotten a couple of pieces with random stats, but they do have things like mastery increases for corruption, whether it's a proc or just simply more raw mastery every time I get any. So you either want to go for mastery versatility gear or gear with decent corruptions that works for you. But I found Windwalker, out of all the alls that I've played, probably the easiest to gear and the easiest to enjoy overall. So definitely would be one I recommend, and I think the buffs for this patch are gonna treat him nice if you wanna stick to your guns and play some Windwalker as a DPS. The next class on this list is gonna be Demonology Warlock, and I feel like Demonology with a 5% buff, Demonology is actually quite good now. I don't know what happened, but there's a couple different playstyles that happened with patch 8.3 as people are starting to discover different essences, and one of the easier to earn essences became a lot more stronger in this patch. That's going to be the Island Essence. The Island Essence basically spawns a couple shards. When you use the on-use effect of that essence, you spawn those shards and you empower them, giving you a lot of extra primary stats, which gives you basically almost like an on-use trinket every 1 minute. This combined with the playstyle of Demonology of sacrificing all of your imps to a massive tyrant, buffing that tyrant and the damage of that tyrant with this 5% extra damage, actually have carved a niche for Demonology Warlocks. There are certain fights in a brand new raid that they actually are really good for, and Demonology in the past has been one of the better specs to play inside of Mythic Plus dungeons. It is no secret that Warlocks are not the most popular caster for Mythic Plus keys. Demonology has been one of the better choices out of the three because of its crazy cleave potential damage, but also the Tyrant single target that it can output. Short cooldowns mean you can use a lot more abilities throughout every single trash bag, but I think with this 5% extra buff, it actually will make him kind of the go-to spec if you end up going with a Warlock in keys. It makes him very, very strong in certain fights within raids, and if you're someone who wants to maybe main Demonology, I feel like this would be the perfect patch for you. This is where you can actually carve yourself a little bit extra damage throughout all the other specs and actually hold a significant numbers within any boss fight. The next spec on this list is Enhancement Shaman. Now Enhance only got a measly 3% buff. It feels like it's not a lot, and essentially it isn't. 3% extra damage for the abilities, majority of Enhancement Shamans will not be able to tell. I am lucky to be able to play Enhance though. I decided to invest a lot of time and opportunity into my Enhancement Shaman. I get the best gear I can on him. I got actually some of the better essences, especially for Mythic Pluses like the Blood rank 3. I did the grind and it was definitely worth it. And with some of the changes the spec is seeing, again, World Vein and other essence that Demonology is using, becoming a lot stronger for this patch, I feel like it's going to be a lot easier to get into Enhancement. However, my Enhance is a pretty geared boy. This is my most geared alt out of all my alts, and that's, again, not counting my Rogue being the character I invest the most amount of time into, but the second most, I would say, would have been at some point Enhancement Shaman. The character also has been getting very lucky with Mythic Plus drops, so I don't really need to optimize him that much. I simply just get to tag on more and more and more damage every single time I get something out of a Mythic Plus drop. But I would say the 3% damage extra for Enhancement Shamans is nice. It does allow the spec to pump out more damage. Enhancement can definitely hold its own damage. It's a squishy class, but it's a glass cannon. It will actually put some great DPS out, but when it comes to a fight that's going to test your defensives, you don't really have a lot of those as enhanced, so it's really going to be really offset to your healer. But if you want to play a very glass cannon playstyle, it's actually quite enjoyable, quite simplistic in a sense, but actually quite effective. I would say a geared Enhancement Shaman is going to have a lot of fun in this patch. And I would say that if you never picked up an Enhancement before, this might be the better time to pick up Enhance if you are willing to invest. This is a spec that's going to need certain essences in order to start performing. Gear is also a must. So if you're starting out and you want to have the least amount of impact into the spec, but the most amount of gain, I would say Windwalker is a better choice, but if you are willing to invest the time, Enhancement is definitely fun and worth. Next, we'll be talking about Marksmanship Hunters. Marksmanship Hunters have very little representation, I would say, all across the board. They're not particularly good in PvP. They don't have a pet stun like a Beastmaster or Survival. Inside of dungeons, I would say Marksmanship Hunter is, for the most part, outshined by Beast Mastery. Beast Mastery and the pets do so much AoE damage, Marksmanship Hunter cannot keep up. Inside of raids, Marksmanship is completely overshadowed by BM, and no matter how many fights I look into, I would say there's even fights where Survival Hunters outperform a Beast Mastery. In a sea of Beast Mastery, a couple Survivals rise to the top, but if you go all the way to the bottom of the ocean, like very, very bottom, like the deep, deep ocean, you might be able to pick out a Marksmanship Hunter or two. None of the buffs that they got with 5% was enough. I would say off the bat, if this is your favorite playstyle and you enjoy playing Marksmanship, this buff should allow a player that likes a Marksmanship playstyle and wants to continue playing Marksman rather than Beast Mastery or Survival. If you're just so dead set on, and trust me, as an Outlaw main, I know how you feel, then Marksman, with this buff, you won't need to swap to Beast Mastery unless you're severely lacking inside of your raid AoE damage on certain fights like Hive Mind, for example. I think Marksmanship Hunters with this buff should be able to hold decent amount of single target damage, get a couple corruptions that help you for single target or AoE, and you should be able to do a little bit extra in order to be a decent and viable member of your own raid. However, I would say that the playstyle just feels awkward. There's definitely certain gaps within the spec, and as you play it, if you are new to Marksman, it definitely feels kind of clunky. I always found it weird with certain specs in the game where you just ignore some mechanics that show up. Like you have different highlights on your screen telling you, oh, this ability is ready, oh, that ability is ready, and you simply just ignore the procs and you just kind of continue trucking on damage. Something fundamentally is weird about Marksman, and maybe Blizzard needs to take him back towards where they were in Legion, which I didn't really like the Legion Hunter. I didn't really understand Marksmanship Hunter in Legion, but at least it was very effective, and majority of players liked the playstyle that it had. It had sense, it had purpose, it had a flow. But the current Marksmanship Hunter, while can do effective damage, there's something about it just in the back of my mind felt off. This is a spec that I really want to try to make work, but in the current state that it's at, you can do heroics, you can do keys, hell, you can even do some battlegrounds with sniper shot. But if you're someone who's going to push any content, this is the spec out of all of these here that's massively overshadowed by Beast Mastery, which is a spec that has been very, very strong in this patch. Finally, we have Frost Mage, and I would say Frost Mage is in a great spot right now. It still is pretty overshadowed by fire in many cases, but I don't think it's a problem with Frost, it's rather just how easy it is to play fire. For fire, for the most part, and this isn't going to be all of it, player skill doesn't really come into it, but when you play a fire mage, the most amount of prep work you need to do with fire to figure out the spec is the gearing process. Proper trinkets, the bracers from Mechagon, best in slot stats, and best in slot Azerites, and for the most part, you're good to go. Fire Mage has the ease of being able to tunnel the boss, and if you just group up all the adds around the boss, their mastery will just cleave all that single target burst output onto the adds, allowing for some incredible amounts of AoE damage. Fire Mages have very consistent bursts, which lines up with majority of boss mechanics, so they can always maintain high DPS. Again, the more adds that are on the boss, the more cleave there is to add in there, the more value the Fire Mage has within a lot of the fights. In a sense, Fire Mage kind of brings the best of both worlds that Arcane and Frost can offer. But for Frost within this patch, I would say there still is a decent spec. Where I would say the Frost excels in, I would say it's a little stronger in Mythic Pluses, it's a little stronger in raids. No, you won't have to go fire just to defeat some of the bosses, but where I could see a lot more Frost Mages is in PvP. I know that even in PvP, there's a lot of Fire Mages with greater Pyroblast, but Frost Mages with this 5% extra buff, they really do feel a little bit more bursty. The damage really starts to add up, and as we get in some of the end game gear, this is where Frost can really take advantage of the scaling system. So in PvP, I think there's going to be a lot more Frost Mages coming out of the woodworks, really trying to get some massive shatters, because this would be the perfect time to do it. Of course, there's still going to be Fire Mages that run with rogues, they get almost free greater pyros, but a good and effective Frost Mage with a rogue or with another class can get some great bursts now with this 5% buff, which does stack with all the other buffs that you get from gear and traits and all the other bonuses that you may be able to use. So I think this is where Frost Mages could really enjoy this patch here, whether you're raiding, doing Mythic Pluses, or doing PvP. You still might feel a little overshadowed by fire, but it's at least a much better position than where Frost used to be, I would say, a patch or two ago. And that's what I would say about all the different specs that we have that got a buff recently. For the most part, I'd say Windwalker feels great, Marksmanship feels weird, Frost feels quite good, especially in PvP, Enhanced still feels great as long as you have the gear. Demonology playstyle is by far, I'd say, my favorite in terms of all the upgrades that they got. This small buff plus all the changes that happen in patch 8.3 makes Demonology very enjoyable to play. But if you guys play any of those specs, all of them should be good. All of them should be able to do quite decent in heroic damage, and in PvP, besides Windwalker that actually doesn't get the benefit of the 5% extra buff, everybody should be doing a little bit more damage, so I guess that's a small quality of life. So if you're a fan of any of these specs, they should essentially be doing pretty good. You won't have to feel like you need to swap to a more superior spec, or a spec that's simply performing a little better than yours, in order to clear all the basic content. You can stick as Marksman, Windwalker, Frost Mage, Enhancement Shaman, and Demonology, and still get you an Azeroth heroic kill, and all the other stuff in the content. So that's about all I have to say about all these specs as I get to play them. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts, how you feel about any of these specs, and how you feel that the buffs affect them, and I'll see all of you guys in another video.